what we're going to work on today is that four-wheeler right there, and it's all in pieces, the differential. So I'm going to show you how to put it all back together, guys, and we'll get it thrown into this beautiful Honda Recon 2004, I believe. There's two passages that look like that on the housing that need to be cleaned out, and one that fits in between two seals. I'll show that to you later in the video. These are the two springs that hold the brake shoes on. That's all that hold the brake shoes on there. There's a bearing inside of there. This housing was trashed. I had to fix the housing. What I'm showing you there is that you take that snap ring off and you knock that bearing out of that side. That's what I'm trying to show you there. Okay, next, this is the brake drum, and it's pretty trashed, but we're limited on funds, so we're just going to make it work. All you have to do is slide it on that axle and line the splines up, and there you go. So the next thing is to slide that brake assembly inside of that brake drum on the axle shaft. And I had to smack it a few times. It must have been sticking a little bit, but that's all there is to that step. And this is the pinion housing or case. And that bearing right there is easy enough to replace if you need to. Just come to this back side, take a punch, and knock it out of there, and knock a new one in. There are two seals that need to go into this housing. And you want this flat part to come up. See, there's a little spring inside in case you get confused. There's a spring inside the seal on that side. It needs to face down, just like that. So then just tap the seal carefully into position. I use the socket, but they do make seal installation tools. This part's very important. If you'll notice inside there, there's a hole, a passageway in the housing. You don't want to block that with a seal. The first seal goes past it. And here in just a minute, I will flip it around. There you go. And that seal, you can tell by the back side how far it needs to go in. You can see it, you know, on the back side of that bearing. As you're tapping it in, tap it in slowly, and you can see where it that seal needs to stop. Okay, now the next seal, I put a little grease around that one just to make it a little easier going in. Goes in the same way with a flat part on the top, and you just make it even with the housing. So the pinion seal needed to come out next so we could install a new one, and it was a pain. That is a seal puller, and I had to just keep trying until I got it pulled out, guys, and then installed the new one. And I just started it off by tapping it in with a hammer and then drove it home with a socket. Okay, something I forgot to mention, if you need to take that pinion out, if you'll look there, that's actually a nut. And you see that little divot there? That's what helps lock it. So get that divot to fold out, and then take probably a punch, because they probably make a tool for it, but you probably don't have it. So just take a punch and knock that ring loose. It unscrews, and then you can pull your pinion out, and there's going to be a bearing on each end of that pinion. The two seals we installed earlier need to be lubricated with some gear oil. Next, flip the housing over and put some gear oil on the bearing. All the bearings need gear oil, as a matter of fact. This is the ring gear, and it has shims on both sides of it. So you may want to mic them to make sure they're the same size, but I think they're the same part number, so they should be the same size shims on both sides of that. And you just slip it into the housing. This is the ring gear cover. See that little vent tube right there? That's the other one. If you need to replace that bearing, just flip the housing over and hit it with a punch right around there on the race, and it'll knock right out of there, and you can replace it if you need to. There's a seal, fits on this side of the cover. Flat side up, guys, just like the other ones I showed you. Tap it in, and you'll see how it fits in there. It just fits flat, flush, whatever down in there. It's real easy. You can tell when you see it.
All right, guys, fresh out of silicone. I need to run to the store and get some. I'll be right back. And I'm back with some silicone, and I got some gear oil.
So again, make sure you put gear oil on all the bearings inside the housing. Here I am making a complete mess of the silicone. I put entirely too much on it and just really made a mess of it. If you ever do get silicone over the holes on a housing like this, be sure and clean it out. If there is silicone in those holes and you torque down the bolt, that hydraulic pressure could crack the housing. There are two different size bolts that go onto this housing cover. That biggest bolts, the two of them go right next to the pinion. If you ever have any question, guys, about the length of a bolt, you don't want to crack the housing, so take a screwdriver, put your finger against it like that, put the bolt against the screwdriver, see you've got like a 1/4 inch or more, so that you know you won't bottom out on the housing, and ruin the housing. Anytime you tighten a housing like this, you want to do it in a crisscross pattern. What I'm showing you here is the silicone coming out a little bit. I'm just barely tightening these bolts. That's how you want to do it. Let me explain further about that.
I don't know how many of you read the instructions on this silicone package. Probably not very many of you, but anyways, after you apply it, you squeeze the part down like I showed you, and then you wait 1 hour, and then you'll go and torque all the bolts. After that, guys, you need to wait 24 hours before you put any fluid into your whatever it is you're working on.
Okay, going back to the brake housing, that's the housing that holds the brakes underneath that, if you'll remember. We need to install this seal. This could have been done after we put that bearing in there, but I just forgot, guys. As long as you get it in before you slide it over the axle, it'll be all right. Now put the axle into the housing. As you can see, the brake drum is on there, the brakes, the assembly is all together. You just slide the housing through there. Line the bolts up. That will only fit on one way. All you have to do is just keep turning that assembly until your holes line up. Put your bolts in there, and then just torque it to specs. Again, crisscross pattern anytime you tighten something like this down. Time to install the spacer. That seal needs to face you as you install it. Slip the spacer in there and it slides inside of that other seal. And that little seal right there, you should get a new one. I didn't get one. I'm going to reuse that old one. It'll be okay. Next, the big flat washer goes on there. And a small washer. Next, the nut with the lip on it, and the lip goes towards the housing. And we'll tighten that up. And last, the other nut, the last nut goes on there to lock that first nut. And we'll get back to this later. I'm not done with this part yet, guys.
Differential is all assembled as far as we can go. I'll show it to you. I'm going to move this four-wheeler over where I can work on it a little easier. And I got to do a little bit of work on that still. There's still a couple bearings in there before we can put the assembly in it. So there's the assembled differential. And it's ready to go in the four-wheeler, which is sitting right here. Got it jacked up for you so you can see what's going on. And we're working on these bearings right here. They got to be knocked out and replaced. So, simple deal. Just going to take this punch, go on the back side, and hit it out with a hammer. Well, simple, but they're tight in there. It's starting to come out. Just gonna keep beating on this thing until it gets out of there. That's all you can do, fellers. Something I feel like I need to tell everybody, because I've watched a few videos on different things and sometimes bearings are getting installed wrong. You need to, when installing a bearing like this, guys, if you don't have a bearing, a tool, a bearing installation tool, you need to hit the outside of the bearing, not the inside, because the inside it damages it. Just hit the outside race. That's what you want to tap on when you're putting a bearing in like this, or any bearing. Otherwise, you could do damage to the bearing by hitting the inside. I'm going to tap this all the way in, this part of the bearing, which it's two separate ones. It's just got Teflon in between it. But then I'm going to take that Teflon, stick it in there on this part of the bearing, and then tap this part in. All right, when this bearing goes in, guys, there's a little groove here. And this first bearing fits just past that little groove, maybe not quite that far. You want the bearings when they're in to be flat here. So this one, just a hair past that groove. Then put your Teflon ring on and then put your other bearing in there. It should land about flat. But that's what you want in the end. You want these two bearings to be together with a Teflon ring and flat with this tube. So just do it how you have to do it, guys, but make sure it ends up like that. Two seals, one by the pinion and one on this, backside tube. I just put grease on it. Put grease on these O-rings or seals or whatever, and that helps them to hold them in place right there while you're assembling this, while you're installing the differential. Be sure that shaft right there is inside of that tube before you install your differential. So I'm having a little trouble. It's binding here on the bearing, the shaft is, as it goes in, and I don't think it's bad. So I put this bolt here, and I'm just going to snug it up real easy like. And I'm going to put one diagonally across so I can tighten it up evenly on both sides. I'm just doing it very gently. What you want to watch for is to make sure that your bearing over here is not getting pushed out. And if it feels like it's binding hard at all while you're tightening it, then you need to stop. There's something, it needs more. There's more going on. See, right now it's wanting to push the bearing out a little bit right there. So I'm just going to keep easing it in. I'm going to keep easing it in with these bolts and just tap on this bearing. And it's just a little bit tight. I believe it'll be fine once we get it in there. Oh, and I just noticed, if you guys noticed, it just slapped shut. You may have seen that on the video. I didn't see it while I was doing it, but so good deal. Now what I'm going to do is take these bolts back out because I want movement in this while I hook up that universal joint, that U-joint up front. Before we do that, a very important step I almost forgot to tell you guys. I tell you all the time, but anytime you do something like this, again, just spin it. Make sure everything's working free. You always want to check that throughout any kind of job like this. Make sure nothing's binding before you go to the next step. I'm going to take the engine loose. There's 2 mounts, one on each side right here. Slide it forward, and then I should be able to slip that shaft in. I'm sure there's going to be just a ton of comments of big professional mechanics out there that, oh, they'd never do that. They'd take them bolts loose out top. And good for you. Who cares? This will work just fine for me, guys. I put the rear end back on the jack stand so it's sitting level with the engine. And now if you guys will see how it's... I'll be able to slip this U-joint right up on there now. And I'm not going to be able to do it on the camera. You get the point. I'm going to slip that on there, guys. I'm close. I just got to give myself a little more room. There you go. You can see it's in there. And what I do is I try to turn the back axle because it's in gear and it won't turn. It's locked, so that means it's everything's slipped in good. It was no problem to slide it on there, guys. I just need more room. I had to get the camera out of the way. So next thing I'm going to do is just, I'm going to slip that boot over just to make it easier. But I'm not going to tighten the clamp. And now I'm going to just put this engine back. Slip that engine back the way it was. Put the spacer in there, tighten everything up. All right, next step is just to put these 4 bolts in here. Finger tight, guys. And then these 4 bolts over here, finger tight. And then you can torque them down. Don't forget after that to tighten up your boot clamp. And like I say again, you can always check this to make sure your shaft hasn't slid out, which is unlikely. And next, the shock bolt, which just goes through this hole in the swing arm, and then put this little skid plate on there. It has 3 bolts, one there, and let's see, one there. So it just fits under there, guys, and you just bolt it up. I'm not going to film myself doing that. I'm just going to do it real quick. Next is this vent pipe. And if you'll remember, there's 2 spots. There's one, guys, and the other one. Come around here, and it's right there. Sorry it's dark, but it's there, believe me. Anyways, guys, let's talk about that real quick. Those vents I showed you earlier in the differential, they need to be cleared out. I cleaned them out with a wire. And guys, the same with the tubes, the rubber tubing. I'm not going to attach them right now. I'm going to get new ones. If they're stopped up, guys, in any way at all, what happens is the fluid inside the differential expands. The fumes inside of there will expand, and you'll blow out seals. You'll blow out your brand new seals, and you don't want to do that. So always make sure those vents are clear and clean as possible. So I'll hook those up later, guys. Let's continue on. And now on to the brakes. I just need to insert these cables into those 2 slots. Should not be a big issue. This spring, there's 2 cables, the top and the bottom. One's a hand lever, one's a foot lever. I only have the parts for 1 lever. They didn't send me all the parts I needed. I'll show you how to do this one. If you can do one, you can do both. The next thing, guys, is this piece right here. On this one, it's going to go that direction so it doesn't rub this housing. So this barrel fits inside of this right here, just like that. And you just pull the spring back like that. Put it through your barrel there, as you can see. And then you got a wing nut, guys, and you just tighten that wing nut up. Man, it's storming outside. That's what all that noise is, if you can hear it. Metal roof. And that's far enough. See, it's mostly almost to the end of that, and that's good enough. So then the next thing I want to do is just next thing all you need to do is stick that on there like that. And that lever's sticking, I'll have to lube it up a little bit. Anyhow, there is a bolt and a nut that needs to go through here like that. So I'll tighten that down. When you get both of these hooked up and in order, you can easily adjust them right here, guys, for your brakes. So the vent pipes, as you can see, I put new ones on, and they are routed all the way up, guys. All the way up to the frame, all the way just underneath the seat. You want them at a very high point so water doesn't get into them while you're riding. And now it's time to fill up the oil with, fill up the rear end, the differential with gear oil. So we just need to take this cap off. This little 10mm bolt right here needs to come out. And there it is, running out. So you just stick that back in there. And put the top back on it. Now for the hub, it's simple enough. Slide it on there. Which the splines have a little play in them. Anyhow, put your nut on there. Your cotter pin back in there. Do the same thing on the other side, guys. And before we put the tires on, guys, and I actually did almost forget about this, but we need to tighten this nut and that nut. So brakes are hooked up. You know, pull your parking brake on so that this doesn't turn while you're tightening this nut. So that's it, guys. I'm going to bolt up the wheels and tires now. I'm sure that you guys all know how to do that. There's going to be criticism on this video. I'm sure people comment, I didn't use the right tools. I didn't clean stuff good enough and all those kinds of things. And I would criticize. Anytime you do something like this, guys, you want it as clean as possible. But what I was doing was just cleaning the inside of the parts with brake cleaning and being very careful not to get any dirt or anything on the inside. I don't recommend doing it that way. If you can clean the whole entire part, it's always best to have everything really clean if you can get it really clean. Also, torque specs, guys. You need to look them up if you want to torque this stuff down. For me, you know, it's a four-wheeler. I've been doing this my whole life, and I've got a feeling of how things are supposed to be torqued down, and I'm sure it'll be fine, guys. But again, yes, it's better to torque it down. Don't get me wrong. I hope this gave you a view of the inside of this differential where you can work on it yourself if you need to. And I know everything wasn't perfect, but like I say, you got a good inside look of how this thing comes apart, goes back together, and you should be able to do it yourself. Subscribe to the channel, guys, if you haven't already. Like and share this video. I'd appreciate it. It always helps. And we'll see you next time.